Hello, my round 5 play of the day from Wijk aan Zee is between Pentala Harikrishna from India and Loek van Wely from the Netherlands. Let's plunge straight in. We haven't got much time. Harikrishna is white and played e4, and the game was a Sicilian. Well, it started out as a so-called Khan Sicilian, that's the Khan, but it quickly transposed into a Scheveningen. In fact, the game ran along very familiar lines. Loek van Wely is quite an expert in this variation. He's played it many times. I'll get to the critical moment in a second. I just want to play through these first few very theoretical moves quite quickly. So let me pause here for the first time. This is a very well-known position. And basically white can employ two different strategies. One is to play fairly slowly and play for e5. So for example, you might play moves like queen e2 and bishop back to f2 round to g3 to play e5, driving away the knight from f6. That's possible. Maybe move the rook to e1 or d1. And the other strategy is to go for it on the king side with g4, and that's what Harikrishna did today. You might remember that this strategy was employed by Karpov against Kasparov in the fateful final game of their 1985 World Championship match, which Kasparov finally won. Well, lots of games have been played with this idea since then, including this one. Okay, let's see what happens. I should mention that World Championship game was slightly different to this, but very similar strategy. So black redeploys the bishop round to the long diagonal. This can be very important for when the position breaks open on the king side, because black often gets counterplay through the middle of the board. And now we see the reason for pulling the bishop back to g2. It allows the rook up to the third rank with this very familiar rook swing. This has all been seen before, by the way, and you might be able to see from the clock times both players are playing very quickly. So g6 prevents the queen coming to h5 and prepares to bring the bishop to g7. It looks quite scary for black at the moment. He's just behind the first 3 ranks, but actually black's position often springs to life. Well, if you just remember back to that Karpov-Kasparov game. Okay, bishop g7 played. Incidentally, Loek van Wely has, in this position, previously tried knight b4, so he knows this position very well, but today he played bishop g7, queen h4, and now we see that black can actually defend by playing knight to f8, defending the h-pawn from this attack. Okay, it looks very grovelly putting the knight back on the 8th rank, but actually, well, you could say if white isn't breaking through with the queen rook, then what are they doing on the h-file? And this rook is very nicely placed. If white breaks with f5, then of course an exchange of pawns will bring the rook into play. So although it looks like white is doing all the attacking here, in fact matters are really not so clear. Okay, so the queen came back straight away with queen f2, because its job has really been done on the h-file, knocking back the knight. And, well, it's a useful battery here, that's one thing that threatens the pawn. Okay, the knight came back, but also, as we'll see, it's very useful for white to attack on the f-file. And this is basically white's strategy. White is attacking on both these files, and in the end the combination of the two does for black, as we'll see. Okay, knight b4 played by van Wely. Funny thing is, looking in the databases, van Wely has actually had this position on 3 previous occasions, but somehow with a different move order, and he's found himself with his move, black to move here, but here it's white to move. And there is quite a big difference here. And the difference is this: Harikrishna now played, I think, an excellent move. he played the bishop to d4. Normally this move should be met in this line by e5. Why? Because if these bishops are exchanged, then that really severely weakens black's king position. So e5 would be the normal response to this. And then after f takes, okay, it looks as though white has a strong attack here, but actually knight takes holds the pawn and gives the knight an excellent square on e5. This is typical. However, in this position, white can simply play bishop takes b6, winning a pawn for nothing. So after bishop d4, I already think that white has a very pleasant position. So good move from Harikrishna. Van Wely exchanged on d4. That also brings the knight on b3 back into play, and this is a very dangerous piece. Knight c6 from Van Wely. If he can exchange pieces, that will help him. And now comes f5. This is very strong indeed. So white's attack is really looking good at this stage after the exchange of bishops. Black would very much like to exchange knights, but then f takes g6 and white breaks through here and the game is over. So knight e5. Well, usually very nice to establish a knight on e5, but without this dark squared bishop, then black's king is looking a bit shaky. So, and now we can see how white exploits this. The queen comes back to h4, and if black's knight comes to f8, then simply f6 is very powerful indeed. The threat, the standard queen h6 and queen g7 mate. So black must try h5. Well, if this is taken, then black is well and truly in the game. We can blockade, there's no danger, and that's not bad. Then the counter-attack comes. But instead white will play knight e2, round to f4, sack here, game over. So simple. So we can see that black is really feeling the effects of losing this dark square bishop. So Van Wely played h5. And now this is a crossroads in the game. White can follow one of two different strategies. He could just take on h6 and then keep hammering down the f and g files. Well, not just that. Okay, the h file is now blocked, but the rook shifts across to pressurize g6, but also you can pressurize e6 by taking and playing perhaps bishop h3 or maybe queen h3, and I think this is very, very good for white. But Harikrishna was really going for black here, and I mean he must have recognized that that was good for white but not necessarily winning, so he attempted instead a winning move. This is more uncompromising, it's more direct. He just wants to play knight f4, sack on h5, and he's through to the king and it's mate. So this is more dangerous, well, for both players actually. So Van Wely needs to react immediately. He must counter-attack. So that's a forced move actually. And now we can see, if white recaptures, the typical counter-attack that black has in this variation. So first of all, exchange the bishops. So black makes use of this bishop, this bishop maneuver that took place a long time ago. So the king is now open, and not only open on the long diagonal but open on this file too. The rook on e8 comes into play, and suddenly white's queen is locked out of play, and this idea of sacking on h5 is just too slow. For example here, well, this is probably a draw actually. Probably white has enough for a draw, but if white plays for a win, say with knight d5, then actually black breaks in, threatening here, and basically black is in time, the counter-attack is in time, black would win. So white has to take great care here. Okay, Harikrishna carried on with his plan, knight f4. Threat to take on h5, and understandably Van Wely played king g7 here, so that if let's say, knight takes h5, then captures and rook h8, and black is fine. But maybe, now this is very risky, but instead of king g7, maybe black could take here and allow this sacrifice. Now this seems extraordinary, because it looks as though white is just delivering checkmate here, but in fact black's king seems to be able to crawl out incredibly, and after g6, you know, the king can hide on e7. Now I'm not completely convinced by this, but it might be that black survives, but you would have to think very carefully before going into that, and I can understand why Van Wely, you know, perhaps running a bit short of time here, played king g7, well, looking at the clock times after just a couple of minutes. But now an excellent move from Harikrishna. Now we've just seen that variation where black manages to exchange bishops, and that weakens white's king. So he played knight d5, very good move. So that means he retains the bishop, which keeps his king safe. When you've thrown your pawns up the board like this, your king lacks cover, and that bishop plays a very important role now in defence. So okay, knight d5. Okay, this was exchanged off, and queen takes c2. But now white can continue the attack without fear of a counter-attack against his king. Okay, rook c8 played, knight f4. Okay, now there is a threat to take on h5, because we have this f6 move afterwards. So rook h8. Now if f6, then black can survive with this move, and if knight h5, king g8. That's why the rook came to h8, and this annoying pin saves black. But with the the rook dragged to h8, white has f takes g6, and now you play on the f file, and white is actually winning this position. Let's just have a quick look at this variation. If king h7, bishop e4 is a killer, threatening the queen and threatening queen h5, exploiting this pin. So queen e2, and now the queen defends the h-pawn, but bishop d3 pushes the queen away, and if knight takes bishop, then there's a very neat checkmate. Beautiful stuff. Something similar happens in the game, we're about to find out. So the king came back to g8, bishop d5. You can see this is already very nasty indeed. So with this rook locked out of play, black is lost here. Rook c1 was played, and this allows a forced win, but black is probably lost anyway. Rook f3. If that's taken, then g6 hangs. King h7, and now a beautiful forced mating sequence. Rook f7. This gets taken, and queen g6 check. It's that gold coins moment where, you know, in the 19th century you hear these stories of someone playing a brilliantly and spectators throwing gold coins over the board. Well, this is perhaps one of those moments. King takes queen, bishop e4, checkmate. That gives you a good feeling to play a finish like that. It wasn't the only finish. You could also play queen takes g6 here, and then that checkmate again. So a beautiful game by Harikrishna. It wasn't perfect, but all in all, I think very nice strategy from white. So that leaves Carlsen, Anand and Karyakin on 3.5 points, sharing the lead after today's round. Anand and Carlsen drew their game, a rather disappointing draw. So they're on 3.5. Nakamura, Leko, Harikrishna and Wang Hao are on 3, so there's a long way to go in the tournament. Thanks very much for watching.